You have nothing left to give, Eleanor. Not even dignity. The words sliced through the air like a blade, sharp and deliberate. Vanessa's laughter followed, low, elegant, venomous. Around the table, the sound bounced off the marble walls of what used to be Eleanor's dining room, a place once filled with birthday candles, spilled milk, and the giggles of her little boy. Now, it was cold, spotless, and silent, like a museum of a life that had already ended. Eleanor sat at the far end of the table, her trembling hands folded in her lap. Her son, Mark, was next to his wife, eyes down, pretending to read the stack of legal documents the lawyer had just placed before them. He wouldn't meet her gaze. He hadn't for months. Her heart ached at the sight of him. The same boy who used to bring her wildflowers after school. Now a man too afraid to stand up for his own mother. "I meant what I said," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking but steady. "I have nothing left." Vanessa smirked, crossing her legs, her diamonds flashing under the chandelier. "Well, that makes this easier then," she said. "At least there won't be any confusion about the inheritance." A hush fell over the room. The lawyer, Mr. Gray, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Eleanor's pulse pounded in her ears. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about what they had taken from her long before this day. Respect, kindness, and love. Things that couldn't be bought or sold, only given, and she had given them all. Her eyes wandered to the corner of the room where an old family photo still hung on the wall. Thomas, her late husband, was smiling beside her. His arm around a much younger Eleanor, Mark perched on his lap. That photo had survived every move, every storm. Vanessa had tried to take it down once, claiming it didn't match the decor. Eleanor had refused. It was the only piece of her life that still felt real. Now, sitting here under the cold light, she could almost hear Thomas's voice again. "If they ever forget where they came from, Ellie, remind them." Her lips trembled. She looked straight at Mr. Gray. "You said you brought all the paperwork?" He nodded, clearing his throat. "Yes, ma'am. Everything you requested." "Good," she said softly. "Then let's give them what they came for." Vanessa leaned forward, a predatory glint in her eye. "Finally," she murmured, not knowing that the real inheritance, the one sealed in an envelope upstairs, would soon rewrite everything she thought she'd won. The silence that followed was almost cruel. Only the faint ticking of the antique clock dared to move in that frozen room. Eleanor could feel every second press against her chest, each one a reminder that she was no longer in control of the family she once held together, with love and patience. Mr. Gray cleared his throat. "As per Mrs. Eleanor Hart's request," he began, "today's meeting is to review the legal distribution of her estate." "Estate?" Vanessa repeated, laughing under her breath. "Oh, please, we already sold half of this place." "What estate?" Eleanor didn't respond. She just watched the young woman's painted lips curl into that smirk, the same smirk she'd worn the day she'd suggested putting Eleanor in a facility. The words still echoed in her mind, cruel and clinical. "It'll be better for her there. Less responsibility for us. Better for her." What a lie. Her gaze drifted toward Mark again. His shoulders hunched. His eyes were red but dry. He looked like a boy who'd been taught to obey his wife's tone more than his mother's tears. There was a time he would have spoken up, would have taken her hand. Now, he just stared at his watch, as though waiting for this to be over. "I never wanted it to come to this," Eleanor said softly, her voice trembling, yet anchored in quiet strength. But sometimes people need to see the end before they understand what they've lost. Vanessa snorted. Oh, don't make this dramatic, Eleanor. We're all family here. Family. The word hit like a slap. Eleanor straightened her back, forcing the tremor out of her hands. Yes, she said slowly. We are family, which is why I want to make sure everyone gets what they deserve. Vanessa's smile faltered for just a second. Something in Eleanor's tone, a quiet authority that shouldn't exist in a woman who claimed to have nothing left. But before she could say more, Eleanor turned to Mr. Gray again. You have everything ready? He nodded. Yes, ma'am. Both sets of documents, as instructed. Vanessa frowned. Both sets? What does that mean? But Eleanor only smiled, the kind of smile that hides 1,000 secrets and a lifetime of wounds. It means, she whispered, that not everything worth keeping is written in ink. For the first time that afternoon, Vanessa looked uneasy. Her diamond ring tapped nervously against the table. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. In her mind, she saw Thomas again, the night before he died, sealing an envelope in his study and saying, Someday, Ellie, this will remind them who we really were. She hadn't opened that envelope since, but she knew that day was coming, and it would begin with Vanessa's laughter and end with her silence. Long before the silence and the shame, Eleanor's world used to hum with life. The house on Maple Avenue was never grand, but it had warmth, the kind that came from Sunday pancakes, the smell of old books, and a radio always playing somewhere in the background. Thomas would whistle while fixing the porch light, and Mark would chase the neighbor's dog until he was covered in grass stains. Back then, Eleanor used to laugh easily. She'd been a teacher for 28 years, known for her patience and her endless supply of colored chalk. Her students adored her. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and baked cookies for every exam week. People said she was too gentle for this world. Maybe they were right. Thomas was the anchor to her softness. He was calm, steady, a man who fixed things with his hands and solved problems with silence. When he died in that car accident 15 years ago, something inside her cracked. She remembered sitting in the hospital hallway, the doctor's voice fading into a dull echo. Instant. No pain. But pain, she realized, didn't come from the body. It came afterward, when there was no one left to share it with. She poured all that remained of her love into Mark, her boy, her only one. She helped him through college, took extra tutoring jobs to pay his rent, sent money even when he insisted he didn't need it. She was there when he graduated, when he landed his first job, when he bought his first used car. Every victory of his felt like redemption for all she'd lost. Then Vanessa entered his life, like a gleaming knife in a velvet box. She was beautiful, articulate, and clever. Eleanor remembered the first dinner they had together. Vanessa arrived late, wearing a white dress and a perfume that filled the room before she even spoke. Her smile was dazzling, too dazzling. She complimented the decor, asked polite questions, but her eyes never really looked at Eleanor. They drifted, cold and assessing, the way someone examines a house before deciding if it's worth buying. Thomas would have seen it immediately, but Eleanor, desperate to see her son happy, ignored the quiet warnings in her chest. She welcomed Vanessa with open arms, convinced that love could smooth over differences, that time would teach them how to be family. She was wrong. The cracks began small. The way Vanessa corrected her at the dinner table, the subtle jokes about her old-fashioned ways. Mark would laugh awkwardly, kiss his wife's cheek, and change the subject. Eleanor learned to smile through it, pretending not to notice. because that's what mothers do. They swallow hurt to keep peace alive. But somewhere deep down, a voice whispered, "She's not laughing with you, Eleanor. She's laughing at you, and one day, you'll see just how cruel her laughter can be." At first, Eleanor tried to convince herself that things would get better once the wedding dust settled. She bought them new cookware as a gift, embroidered their initials on dish towels, even baked the same lemon cake Vanessa had pretended to love during their engagement dinner. But every act of kindness seemed to widen the distance between them. Vanessa rarely thanked her. Instead, she'd flash that perfect smile and say, "Oh, you didn't have to, Eleanor," in a tone that always sounded like you shouldn't have. The young couple moved into a new suburban home, just 30 minutes away, yet it might as well have been another world. Vanessa decorated every corner in sleek white and chrome, replacing warmth with symmetry. Eleanor visited every Sunday at first, bringing home-cooked meals, small gifts for Mark, little toys for their first child on the way. But slowly, those visits became inconvenient. "Mom, Vanessa's been so tired lately," Mark would say over the phone. "Maybe come next week instead?" There was always a next week, until there wasn't. When baby Ava was born, Eleanor thought things would change. She spent nights knitting tiny socks, saving up for a handcrafted cradle. But when she arrived at the hospital with flowers and gifts, the nurse told her Vanessa had already checked out. "Family only," Vanessa had said. Family. The word stung, the way it always did when Vanessa used it, like a door closing. Weeks later, Eleanor finally got to hold Ava for the first time. The baby's tiny hand wrapped around her finger. And for a fleeting second, the ache in her chest disappeared. But even that moment came with strings attached. Vanessa had handed the baby over with a sweet smile and said, "Be careful. She's used to gentle hands." The implication was subtle, but sharp as glass. Eleanor froze, pretending not to hear. Mark said nothing. From then on, every interaction became a performance. Vanessa played the gracious wife, Eleanor, the doting mother, and Mark, the exhausted peacemaker, stuck between them. But beneath the polite smiles and Sunday brunches, resentment simmered. Once, while helping fold laundry, Eleanor overheard Vanessa talking on the phone in the next room. "She means well, but honestly, she's exhausting, always trying to be involved. Once she's gone, maybe we can finally make this house ours." Eleanor's hands trembled around the soft fabric. "Once she's gone." The words hit harder than she expected, not because of their cruelty, but because Mark, sitting right beside his wife, said nothing. That night, Eleanor sat alone in her kitchen, the house too quiet, the ticking clock too loud. She poured herself a cup of tea, but never drank it. For the first time, she wondered if her kindness had become permission, if love, given too freely, could be turned into a weapon. The next morning, she took out her old will from the drawer. She read it twice, then placed it aside. Something inside her whispered, "It's time to write a new one." Years rolled by quietly, like a slow tide eroding the shore. Eleanor rarely visited now, not because she didn't want to, but because the silence after every visit became unbearable. Vanessa would greet her at the door with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, and Mark would hover nearby, nervous, like a man caught between two storms. Still, she tried. She brought gifts for Ava's birthdays, sent money for school trips, even mailed Mark casseroles during his busy seasons at work. She told herself love was about persistence, not reward. Then came the year everything began to crumble. It started with a phone call late one night. Mark's voice was low, shaky. "Mom, I need a favor. Just until the promotion comes through." He needed $5,000. A loan, he said. Vanessa didn't know. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She withdrew her savings the next morning, telling the bank clerk it was for something important. She never asked for it back. 2 months later, another call came, this time quieter, more desperate. "Just one more time, Mom. I promise I'll pay you back soon." She wired the money again. She didn't realize Mark had lost his job, that Vanessa was furious about the debt. By the time she found out, it was through a slip of the tongue at a family dinner. Vanessa, smiling sweetly, had said, "We'd be debt-free if Mark's mother stopped trying to help." The table went silent. Mark didn't defend her. Eleanor looked at her plate, pretending not to understand. That night, when she got home, she sat at her late husband's desk, the one still smelling faintly of cedar and ink. She hadn't opened those drawers since Thomas's death, but something inside urged her to. She sifted through old tax papers, yellowed envelopes, and then found it, a small sealed letter tucked between two folders. Her breath caught. The handwriting was Thomas's. Across the front it read, "For Eleanor, if you ever feel alone." She didn't open it right away. Instead, she placed it in her bedside drawer, as though just having it nearby was enough. But it haunted her. A secret waiting for the right moment to speak. The following weeks were a blur of strained calls and polite refusals. Vanessa stopped answering her texts. Mark visited less, always too busy. Eleanor tried to make peace with it. She filled her days with gardening, church events, and teaching piano to neighborhood kids. Yet, no matter how much she tried to convince herself she was fine, the emptiness followed her home each night. Sometimes, she'd wake up to the sound of a car passing and imagine Thomas sitting at the edge of the bed, his voice calm and steady as ever. "Don't let them take everything, Ellie. Some things must stay protected." She didn't yet know what he meant. But the letter in her drawer, and the faint memory of a locked box in the attic, began to feel heavier with every passing day. It was a rainy afternoon when Eleanor finally opened the letter. The sound of the storm outside filled the silence of her house, wind rattling the windows, raindrops racing down the glass like tears. She sat at the kitchen table, her fingers trembling as she tore open the envelope Thomas had left her. His handwriting was as steady as she remembered, every loop deliberate, every word drenched in his calm authority. "My dearest Ellie," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you've had to face more loneliness than any woman deserves. You always believed the best in people, even when they gave you their worst. But if you ever feel cornered, remember, I left something to protect you." Eleanor's breath caught. The letter continued. "In the attic, behind the cedar chest, there's a small metal box. Inside, you'll find another will, one I made separate from yours. It is to be used only if our family ever forgets what kindness means. The lawyer, William Gray, has a copy. He knows when to act." Her hand flew to her mouth. For a long time, she couldn't move. The storm roared louder, lightning slicing through the sky, illuminating the walls like a stage set for revelation. Slowly, she climbed the attic stairs, her legs shaking with each step. Dust clung to her breath. The faint smell of mothballs and old cedar filled the narrow space. She found the chest exactly where Thomas had described it, and behind it, the box. A small, rusty thing, locked tight. The key was taped to the underside of the chest, wrapped in faded masking tape. Thomas had thought of everything. When she opened the box, she didn't find gold or jewels, only papers. The first was a letter addressed to "Our son, Mark." The second was a legal document, another will sealed and notarized. The third was a photograph of their family: Thomas, Eleanor, and little Mark at the beach, all windblown and smiling. Tears blurred her vision. "If he forgets, Ellie," Thomas had written in a note attached to the will, "this will remind him what matters more than money." Eleanor sat on the attic floor for hours, her knees pressed to her chest. The papers spread out before her like fragments of a life she used to know. She realized then what Thomas had done, not out of distrust, but out of love. He had seen the future she couldn't. He had known how greed could twist even the gentlest hearts. That night, Eleanor called Mr. Gray for the first time in 15 years. His voice was older, slower, but still steady. "Mrs. Hart," he said softly after she told him everything, "Thomas made me promise I'd protect that document until the day it's truly needed." Eleanor looked out the window at the rain-soaked street. "That day might be closer than you think," she whispered. When the storm passed, she sealed the box again and placed it back in the attic. She decided she would never mention it. Not to Mark, not to Vanessa. Let time, and their choices, decide who deserved what. The house felt smaller the day Vanessa brought up the idea of assisted living. Eleanor had just finished arranging flowers in the vase, fresh lilies, Thomas's favorite, when Vanessa's voice cut through the quiet like a blade wrapped in honey. "Mom?" she began, using that careful, sugary tone she reserved for uncomfortable topics. "Mark and I have been talking. We think it might be better if you moved somewhere that could really take care of you." Eleanor froze. "Take care of me?" she repeated, the words dry in her throat. "I've been taking care of myself for 68 years. Vanessa smiled, the kind of smile that looked like compassion from a distance, but up close, felt like pity. "Of course you have. You're incredible. But this house is getting old, and it's so far from us. You'd have people around you, doctors, friends your age." Friends your age? That phrase stung worse than the rest. Mark, sitting beside his wife, said nothing at first. He fiddled with his wedding ring, eyes on the floor. Finally, he murmured, "Mom, we just want what's best for you." Eleanor looked at her son, the boy who used to cry when she left him at kindergarten, now agreeing to send her away like a package too heavy to carry. "And what's best for me," she said slowly, "is being near my family." Vanessa sighed, exchanging a quick glance with Mark. "We'll visit all the time," she promised, her tone already dismissive. "And we'll take care of the house in the meantime, maybe even do a few renovations." There it was, the real reason, tucked neatly between words like care and help. Eleanor felt her stomach twist. She'd known this day would come. She just hadn't expected it to come so quickly, or from the mouths of the people she'd loved most. She wanted to scream, "You don't get to take what I built." But she didn't. Years of being polite, of holding her tongue, had trained her well. She just smiled faintly, nodding like she was considering it. That night, she walked through the house in silence. Every room whispered memories. The crack on the kitchen tile from when Mark dropped his first glass, the faded spot on the wall where Thomas's tools used to hang, the echo of laughter that no longer belonged to anyone living. In the attic, dust swirled around her like ghosts. She touched the edge of the cedar chest, the same one hiding the box, and whispered, "Not yet." She wasn't ready to let go. Not of the house, not of the life, not of the last piece of dignity they hadn't stolen from her. When she came back downstairs, she saw the lilies had wilted. Their petals had curled inward, beautiful things collapsing quietly, just like her. 2 weeks later, the moving truck arrived earlier than scheduled, a detail that seemed to delight Vanessa. She stood on the porch, coffee in hand, barking instructions to the movers as if she were hosting a renovation show. "That box goes in storage." "No, not that one. The big one with her books." Her books. The way she said it, like those boxes were just clutter, sliced through Eleanor like a paper cut she couldn't show anyone. Inside, Eleanor moved slowly, touching each wall, each doorframe, memorizing the texture of her life. Every creak in the floorboard seemed to plead, "Don't leave me." "Mom, don't overexert yourself," Mark said from behind her, his voice thin. He looked exhausted, or maybe guilty. It was hard to tell. "You know," she said quietly, "your father and I built this place after you were born. He laid these floors himself." "I know," Mark replied, eyes darting away. Vanessa thinks a lot of things," Eleanor interrupted. The words came sharper than intended. He flinched slightly, like a boy caught doing something wrong. There was an awkward silence before Vanessa's voice echoed from the living room. "Mark, honey, can you help the movers? They're asking about the furniture." He went, grateful for the escape. Eleanor sank onto the bottom stair, watching them bustle around her house, her things boxed, labeled, and carried away by strangers. She wanted to shout, "Stop!" but she stayed still, clutching the edge of the stair railing until her knuckles turned white. Later that afternoon, when Vanessa handed her a folder labeled retirement options, Eleanor finally spoke. "You've already chosen a place, haven't you?" Vanessa smiled, bright, polished, rehearsed. "We just want you to be comfortable. It's called Silver Pines. They have activities, meals, medical staff on call 24 hours. It's a nursing home," Eleanor said flatly. "Well," Vanessa tilted her head, "it's a very nice one." Mark avoided her gaze. "Mom, it's only temporary. You'll have your own room, a view of the gardens." Eleanor raised a hand to silence him. "I'm old, Mark, not dead. I know what this is." For the first time in years, her voice filled the room, heavy with the authority of a woman who had once managed classrooms, raised a family, and buried a husband without losing herself. Vanessa blinked, startled, but then that smile returned, thin and false. "Please, Eleanor, don't make this harder than it has to be." Eleanor looked out the window. The moving truck was almost full. Her heart felt hollow, but inside that emptiness, something fierce was forming, a clarity she hadn't felt in years. That night, she sat alone in her bedroom for the last time. She opened her bedside drawer and stared at Thomas's letter. For a long while, she just ran her fingers over his handwriting, whispering, "You were right. They've forgotten." Then she folded the letter, slipped it into her purse, and made her decision. If they wanted to take everything from her, she would give it, gladly, but not before finding out which of them still had a soul. The morning Eleanor left her house, the sun was mercilessly bright, too bright for a day that felt like death. Vanessa had arranged everything, the transport van, the paperwork, even the check-in call with the facility director. She moved through the house briskly, efficient and smiling, as if this were just another project to tick off her list. "Don't forget your medications, Eleanor," she said, placing a small bag on the counter. "They'll take good care of you there." Eleanor looked around one last time. The curtains fluttered in the breeze, the scent of lavender cleaner heavy in the air. Everything was neat. Too neat. Her life had been folded, boxed, and sanitized into something unrecognizable. Mark helped her into the car. His hands were shaking. "Mom, we'll visit soon," he said softly. She smiled. But it was the kind of smile that exists only to stop tears from falling. "Of course you will," she said. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll be just fine. The drive to Silver Pines was long and quiet. Eleanor watched the landscape blur past. The gas station where she used to buy ice cream for Mark. The library where she'd volunteered summers. The church where she'd buried Thomas. Each place slipped away behind her like pages being torn from a book. When they arrived, Vanessa did all the talking at the reception desk. The staff were polite, cheerful. Too cheerful. They offered Eleanor tea, a tour, a schedule of fun activities. She nodded through it all, her thoughts elsewhere. When Vanessa left to handle some final details, Eleanor excused herself and walked to the garden. It was there, under a crooked oak tree, that she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 15 years. "William Gray speaking," came the familiar, gravelly voice on the other end. "Mr. Gray," she said, her tone barely above a whisper. "It's Eleanor Hart." There was a long pause, followed by a quiet exhale. "Mrs. Hart, I wondered when I'd hear from you." "They've started," she said simply. "Just like Thomas warned." He didn't ask who they were. He already knew. "Do you still have the letter?" "Yes," she said. "And the box." "Then don't touch them again," he said. "Keep them exactly as they are. When the time comes, I'll know." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the breeze brush against her face. "I think that time isn't far away, William." "Then I'll be ready," he replied. His voice softened. "Thomas believed you'd know when to call. You always had the better instincts." For a moment, she let herself smile. Instinct or heartbreak, I'm not sure which one it is anymore. They spoke briefly about practicalities, the lawyer's copy of the hidden will, the instructions Thomas had left. When she hung up, she felt lighter, though she couldn't explain why. That night, alone in her new room at Silver Pines, Eleanor unpacked her suitcase. Between her clothes and a framed photo of Thomas, she placed a folded note. It read, in her trembling handwriting, "Let them think I've given up. That's when the truth will matter most." Silver Pines was spotless, quiet, and unbearably polite. The kind of place that smelled like lemon disinfectant and polite indifference. The nurses smiled too much, spoke too softly, and always called her sweetheart. Eleanor quickly learned that being invisible was easy here. At first, Mark visited every Sunday. He'd bring flowers or chocolates, sit by her bed, talk about work. But each visit grew shorter. Each goodbye came faster. Vanessa came only twice. Once to take photos for the family group chat, and another time to drop off some documents Eleanor didn't even ask for. After the second month, the visits stopped. From the nurses, she learned more than she was meant to. They mentioned a big renovation at the house. New kitchen counters, a pool, even a home gym. Vanessa's social media, which Eleanor sometimes scrolled through on her old iPad, showed a sparkling new lifestyle. Dinner parties, vacations, designer handbags. Each post came with the same caption, "Grateful for new beginnings." Eleanor smiled bitterly the first time she saw it. New beginnings, indeed. Her name was nowhere in those beginnings. One morning, she overheard a nurse whispering outside her room. "Poor woman. Her son's wife sold the old place already. Heard it went for nearly $1 million. Eleanor sat up slowly, her heart steady. Not shocked, not broken, just numb. She'd expected it. Maybe she even needed it to happen, to see how far they'd go once they believed she was powerless. That day, she made her choice. When the facility's director visited, asking about her memory test, Eleanor smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, I forget things all the time now. Can't even recall what day it is." She could see the shift in his eyes. Sympathy, pity, the label of old and fading. It was the perfect disguise. The rumors spread quickly. Mrs. Hart was losing her memory. She confused names, misplaced things, sometimes called her late husband by her son's name. Mark believed it instantly when the nurse mentioned it over the phone. Vanessa was delighted. "Poor thing," she'd said, pretending to sigh. "At least she's comfortable." Within weeks, they stopped calling altogether. But in the evenings, when everyone thought she was asleep, Eleanor sat at her desk, writing letters she never sent. One to Ava, one to Thomas, one to herself. Letters full of everything she couldn't say aloud. Disappointment, love, and a quiet fury she didn't know she still possessed. Sometimes she whispered to the air, as if Thomas were beside her. "You were right, love. They needed to forget before they could learn." And though her hands trembled when she folded each page, there was purpose in the motion. Steady, deliberate, controlled. They thought she was fading. But in truth, Eleanor was waiting. Waiting for the moment when everything they'd taken would return to its rightful place. All she needed was time. And time, unlike trust, was something she still owned. It was a Friday evening in late autumn when Eleanor overheard the call. The hallway outside her room was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights. The nurse had left her door slightly ajar after checking her vitals. She was half asleep when she heard Mark's voice, muffled but unmistakable, from the visitors' lounge down the hall. "I just don't see the point anymore," he was saying. "She barely knows who I am. The bills keep coming, and—" Vanessa's voice cut in, crisp as glass. "Mark, listen to me. She's being cared for. Isn't she? She's fed, she's warm. What more can you do? You've done enough." "But she's my mother," he said softly. There was a pause, long enough for Eleanor's heart to stutter. Then came the tone she'd learned to fear, the one Vanessa used when she wanted something. "She's not the woman who raised you anymore, and the longer she stays there, the more it costs us. You said yourself, the savings are gone. If we sell what's left, we can finally move forward." "Vanessa—" "Mark," she interrupted. "She doesn't even remember your visits. She told the nurse you were her husband last time, didn't she? What's the point in clinging to guilt?" Eleanor pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her breath shallow. She remembered that nurse's mistake, calling Mark Tom once, and Eleanor, half joking, had said, "Oh, I wish he were still here." That offhand remark had become their justification for erasing her. She could hear Vanessa's footsteps now, the echo of her heels like a countdown. "End the payments, Mark. It's time. We can't keep throwing money into the past." Eleanor didn't hear his answer. The phone clicked, and silence returned, thicker, colder than before. She sat motionless for a long time, staring at the pale moonlight on her bedsheet. Her mind felt eerily clear. Every doubt, every ache, every ounce of hesitation she'd carried these years melted into a single, steady thought. Enough. They had taken her home, her trust, her dignity, but they would not take her truth. The next morning, before the nurses came with her breakfast, Eleanor made a call. "Mr. Gray?" she said, her voice firm but calm. "It's time." The lawyer didn't ask what she meant. He only replied, "Understood. I'll make the arrangements." Eleanor hung up, her hands no longer shaking. She dressed herself slowly, brushed her silver hair, and placed her wedding ring back on her finger. She hadn't worn it in years. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see an old woman waiting for death. She saw someone reclaiming her story. By noon, she sat by the window, watching leaves scatter across the garden path. For the first time in a long while, she felt peace, the kind that comes not from surrender, but from quiet victory. Let them laugh, she thought. Let them believe they've already won. Because soon, the laughter would stop. And when it did, truth would speak louder than any of them could bear. Eleanor passed quietly, the way gentle people often do, without ceremony, without noise, as if she'd simply slipped from one world into another. The nurses found her sitting in the garden at Silver Pines just after dawn, a cup of tea beside her, untouched but still warm. Her face was peaceful. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of fear. Only a faint smile, as if she'd been waiting for that morning all along. When Mark received the call, he said nothing for a long time. Vanessa handled the details, the cremation, the obituary, the announcements. She called it simplifying things. Mark just nodded through everything, his mind drifting between guilt and relief, though he wouldn't admit either out loud. The funeral was small, 12 people at most, a few old neighbors, 1 or 2 of Eleanor's former students, and Mr. William Gray, the family lawyer, sitting quietly in the back pew. Ava, now 12, clung to her father's hand, eyes red but dry. She didn't fully understand why the grown-ups spoke in hushed voices, or why her mother looked annoyed instead of sad. When the service ended, Vanessa leaned toward Mark and whispered, "She would have wanted something simple." Mark nodded again, though in his heart, he knew Eleanor would have preferred a choir, lilies, and laughter. A celebration, not a whisper. After the funeral, everyone gathered briefly at the family home, the home Vanessa now called hers. The walls gleamed with fresh paint, the smell of newness covering every trace of the woman who had built it. The old photographs were gone, the furniture replaced. Only one thing remained: a single framed photo of Eleanor and Thomas on the piano, tucked behind a vase as though it were forgotten. Vanessa noticed Mr. Gray standing by the door, holding a brown leather folder. "Oh, Mr. Gray," she said brightly. "I suppose this is about the will?" The lawyer gave a small nod. "Mrs. Hart requested a private reading for the family," he said. "Just you, your husband, and your daughter." Vanessa smiled. "Of course." She turned to the guests and announced, "If you'll excuse us, there's just a bit of paperwork to handle." The guests murmured condolences and drifted out, leaving the house quiet again. Mr. Gray sat at the dining table, the same table where Eleanor had once sat, humiliated, declaring she had nothing left. The memory hung in the air like a ghost no one wanted to acknowledge. He unfolded the document slowly, his voice steady and formal. "This is the last will and testament of Mrs. Eleanor Hart." Mark stared at his hands. Vanessa's eyes gleamed with restrained excitement. Ava fidgeted beside them, whispering, "Daddy, what's happening?" "Hush, sweetheart," Vanessa said softly, her voice dripping with anticipation. "Grandma left us something." Mr. Gray cleared his throat. "To my son, Mark Hart, I leave the house, my remaining savings, and personal belongings." Vanessa exhaled sharply, satisfied. But then he continued, "With the condition that he and his wife uphold the values of care, respect, and family. Should they fail to do so, all assets will revert to the secondary clause outlined in the addendum." Vanessa blinked. "Addendum?" she repeated. Her voice was sharp now, the sweetness gone. Mr. Gray looked up, meeting her eyes. "Yes, Mrs. Hart. The sealed addendum, as per your mother-in-law's final instructions." For a moment, no one moved. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, the way it does before a storm breaks. Vanessa forced a small laugh. "Addendum?" she repeated, feigning confusion. "Oh, that must be some old paperwork. My mother-in-law was a sentimental woman." Mr. Gray said nothing. He reached into his folder and placed a sealed, yellowing envelope on the table. Its wax seal bore the faint impression of Thomas Hart's initials. T.H. Mark's head snapped up. "Dad's seal?" he murmured. Mr. Gray nodded. "Your father and mother signed this document together nearly 17 years ago. It was delivered to me under strict instructions. To be opened only if the original will was ever questioned, or if the beneficiaries showed, and I quote, a failure of gratitude." Vanessa's smile vanished. "That's ridiculous," she said sharply. "What failure of gratitude? We've done everything for her. We paid for her care, didn't we?" Mr. Gray's expression didn't change. "You paid with her money, Mrs. Hart." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ava's small hand gripped her father's sleeve, sensing the shift in the air. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Why is everyone mad?" Mark didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the envelope. Vanessa reached out a hand. "There's no need to open that. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." But Mr. Gray had already broken the seal. The sound of the tearing wax was soft but final, like the closing of a door that would never open again. He unfolded a single letter. Handwritten, elegant, unmistakably Thomas's. The paper was fragile, slightly yellowed at the edges, yet the ink remained bold and deliberate. He began to read aloud. "To my beloved wife, Eleanor, and to my son, Mark, should this letter ever be read, it means something precious has been forgotten. Love is not inherited. It must be earned, guarded, and lived." Mark swallowed hard. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Eleanor gave everything to this family, her time, her peace, her forgiveness. If her kindness is ever repaid with neglect or greed, this letter shall serve as correction." The lawyer paused, his voice low. "There's more," he said. He continued, "In such a case, the inheritance of all shared property, the home, the savings, and family assets, shall transfer to the next rightful heir, under the guardianship of one deemed worthy." Vanessa's eyes widened. "Next rightful heir?" she echoed, her voice cracking. Mr. Gray glanced at her, then at Mark. "It appears your father had great faith in one other person." He pulled out a second document, the official legal copy of the hidden will. The signatures gleamed under the light, perfectly preserved. Vanessa rose from her chair, panic creeping into her tone. "This is absurd. She was old. She didn't know what she was doing." Mr. Gray's voice cut through hers, calm and merciless. "This will predate any changes your mother-in-law made. It was signed by both Eleanor and Thomas, witnessed and notarized. It is fully binding." Mark sat motionless, staring at the letter. His face had gone pale. "Mr. Gray?" he whispered. Who's the next heir?" The lawyer folded the paper slowly, deliberately. "Their granddaughter," he said. "Ava Hart." The room froze. Ava blinked, not fully understanding what she'd just heard. "Me?" she whispered. "Grandma left everything to me?" Vanessa was the first to react. She laughed, but it came out high-pitched, brittle. "That's impossible. She's a child. You can't just... That's not how wills work." Mr. Gray didn't look up from the document. "Actually, Mrs. Hart, it is precisely how this will works. Your husband's parents established a conditional clause. Until Ava reaches legal age, all assets will remain in trust, under the supervision of an appointed guardian." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "And who's that supposed to be? You?" The lawyer finally met her gaze. "No, Mrs. Hart. The guardian is named in your father-in-law's handwriting." He read the line aloud. "In the event that both Eleanor and I have passed, Guardianship of our estate and our granddaughter shall belong to Mr. George Harris, our neighbor and longtime friend, until Ava comes of age. Mark's head jerked up. Mr. Harris? The old man next door? Mr. Gray nodded. The same. Your father trusted him. He was also a witness to this document. Vanessa's face went red, her voice rising. This is outrageous! That woman manipulated him, both of them. This is some kind of joke. But her voice faltered when she saw the lawyer's calm expression. There was no humor there, only quiet authority. The truth was undeniable, and it terrified her. Ava tugged gently at her father's sleeve. Daddy? Did Grandma think you were bad? The question pierced the silence like a pin through glass. Mark didn't answer right away. His jaw clenched. His eyes shimmered with unshed tears. No, sweetheart, he whispered finally. Grandma just wanted to make sure you were safe. Vanessa slammed her palm against the table. Safe? Safe from what? From us. She was old and bitter. This is her revenge. Mr. Gray's tone remained calm. Mrs. Hart, your mother-in-law was of sound mind. Her final statement was recorded and witnessed. She was very clear about her intentions. Vanessa's breath came in shallow gasps. She turned to Mark. Say something. You can't just sit there and let this happen. But Mark didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the letter, on his father's handwriting, steady and unmistakable. He could almost hear Thomas's voice again, the same one that used to echo through the house on long summer evenings. A man who forgets kindness loses more than fortune, son. He loses himself. The memory hit him like a blow. His throat tightened. He covered his face with his hands, the sound of his breathing ragged. Ava climbed into his lap, resting her head against his chest. It's okay, Daddy, she said softly. Grandma said people forget sometimes, but she said love remembers. Vanessa turned away, pacing, her jewelry clinking angrily. This isn't over, she muttered. I'll fight this in court if I have to. Mr. Gray closed the folder. You're welcome to try, he said simply. But I wouldn't recommend it. The documents are sealed and witnessed. Everything she left behind is protected, including her reasons. Vanessa stood frozen, her face pale and taut, her breath coming in short, furious bursts. This isn't real, she whispered, shaking her head. She couldn't have done this. She wouldn't dare! Mr. Gray placed another envelope on the table, smaller than the first. Its paper was soft and worn, as though it had been handled many times before. Mrs. Hart anticipated that reaction. He said quietly, She left this letter for you and for her son. Mark stared at the envelope. His name was written in Eleanor's careful handwriting. For my boy. Next to it, another name. For Vanessa. He hesitated, then reached for his. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the letter, the scent of lavender rising from the paper, the scent of his childhood home. My dearest Mark, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means I am gone, and you have faced the hardest truth of all, that love cannot survive where gratitude dies. Mark swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the delicate script. I tried to give you everything I could. Time, comfort, understanding. Maybe that was my mistake. I never taught you how to fight for what truly matters. You grew up thinking love was guaranteed. But love, my son, is a daily choice. One I made for you, even when you stopped making it for me. He blinked rapidly, a tear falling onto the page. Vanessa watched, her face twisting between anger and disbelief. If your heart is still open when you read this, the letter continued, then it is not too late. kindness can still find its way back home. Remember, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the only inheritance that lasts. Mark's voice broke as he whispered, "Mom." He pressed the paper to his forehead, his shoulders shaking. Ava sat beside him silently, her small hand resting on his arm. Mr. Gray turned to Vanessa. "There's one for you as well." She didn't move. "I don't want it." "It's addressed to you," he said gently. Her jaw tightened. She snatched the envelope, ripped it open, and read aloud, her voice rising with every line. "Vanessa, I never hated you. I saw in you the same hunger I once had, to prove your worth in a world that overlooks women. But ambition without compassion turns sharp. You took from me not because you needed to, but because you could." Her breath hitched. She lowered the letter, voice trembling. "You think I don't know pain?" There was no answer, only silence, thick and merciless. "If you ever decide to raise Ava with love instead of pride," the letter ended, "then perhaps one day she'll forgive you too. Until then, take care of the woman you see in the mirror. She needs it." Vanessa folded the paper roughly, her eyes glistening but defiant. She pushed back her chair, muttering, "She always knew how to make herself the victim." She stormed toward the door, but before she could reach it, Ava's small voice cut through the tension. "Mommy," she said softly, "Grandma wasn't the victim. You were just too angry to see it." Vanessa froze mid-step. The room fell silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to stop, as if the house itself was listening. 3 weeks had passed since the reading of the will, but the echo of that day refused to die. Vanessa hadn't spoken to Mark. She'd moved into the guest room, her silence colder than any argument. The house, once filled with the illusion of victory, now felt haunted, every polished surface reflecting guilt instead of pride. Mark spent his nights sitting at the kitchen table, Eleanor's letter folded neatly beside a cup of cold coffee. He read it again and again until the ink blurred, until the words carved themselves into his mind. Love cannot survive where gratitude dies. He hadn't realized how deep those words would cut, or how true they were. Ava was the only one who seemed untouched by the tension. She went about her days quietly, drawing pictures of her grandmother and leaving them by the window. So Grandma can see them from heaven. Sometimes Mark found her whispering to the photo of Eleanor, telling her about school or how Mommy and Daddy didn't talk anymore. Vanessa, meanwhile, was unraveling. She'd called 3 lawyers already, each of them giving the same answer. The will was airtight. No loopholes, no chance to contest, but Vanessa wasn't one to accept defeat. On a gray Thursday morning, she made her 4th call, this time to a man named Richard Barlow, a ruthless estate attorney known for finding cracks in stone. "Mrs. Hart," he said over the phone, "if there's a hidden clause, I'll find it. But I'll need full access to all her records. Financial, medical, legal, everything." "Do it," Vanessa replied quickly. "I'll send what I have." She gathered every paper she could find in the house. Medical bills from Silver Pines, bank statements, old letters. That night, while Mark slept, she sat in the living room surrounded by stacks of documents. The rain outside tapped against the window like impatient fingers. That was when she found it, a thin, beige folder labeled in Eleanor's neat handwriting. Private, property records, Thomas Hart Trust. Her pulse quickened. She opened it. Inside were deeds, notarized pages, and a handwritten note folded in half. The note was dated years before Eleanor's supposed memory loss. "To be included only with the secondary testament," it read. "This clarifies the origin of the property known as the Hart residence." Vanessa frowned. The letter inside wasn't addressed to Eleanor. It was from her, and it was written to Thomas. She began to read, her voice barely audible. Thomas, I've done what you asked. I've signed the property transfer, but please, don't ever tell Mark the truth. He wouldn't understand. Not yet. Vanessa blinked, her mouth dry. Property transfer? Don't tell Mark? She read the next line and felt her stomach drop. It's better he never knows Ava's inheritance wasn't built from our savings, but from what we took to keep our family together. For the first time that night, Vanessa's confidence faltered. She read the line again and again, her mind spinning. What we took, she whispered. The implication sat heavy, dark, unspoken. But it changed everything, because if that letter meant what she thought it did, then Eleanor wasn't just hiding a will. She'd been hiding a sin. The storm outside grew louder, wind howling against the windows as Vanessa spread the documents across the floor. Every page seemed older than the last. Bank statements in fading ink, property deeds, receipts marked confidential. The words blurred as her eyes raced from one to another, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. She found it, a transfer record dated 27 years ago. It bore Eleanor's signature and a large red stamp. Asset relocation, Thomas Hart Trust. The amount made her gasp. $600,000. Vanessa's pulse quickened. 600,000? She whispered. But they never had that kind of money. She kept digging through old envelopes, tax letters, notarized files. And then she saw it. A name. William and Jensen Medical Fund. She froze. That was the same foundation that had once belonged to Thomas's employer, the firm where he'd worked as an accountant for over 2 decades. Vanessa's eyes widened as the puzzle started to form. Oh my God, she breathed. They took it. The letter from Eleanor suddenly made sense. What we took to keep our family together. Thomas hadn't left his job because of stress, as everyone had believed. He'd been forced out. They must have embezzled the money, or transferred it, years before his death. And somehow, Eleanor had buried the evidence under the name of a trust. Vanessa sat back on her heels, her hands trembling. Her hatred for the woman had burned for years, but this was something else entirely. Saint Eleanor, she whispered bitterly. The perfect mother. The martyr. The liar. She glanced toward the family photo on the wall, the one Mark had refused to take down. Eleanor's smile stared back, calm and timeless. Vanessa felt a strange chill run down her spine, because if this was true, then everything, the house, the savings, even Ava's inheritance, was built on stolen money. She needed proof. Grabbing her phone, she snapped photos of the documents, then dialed Richard Barlow, her attorney. I need you to look into the William and Jensen Medical Fund, she said quickly. Transactions between 1998 and 2001. There's something off. Understood, came his smooth reply. Should I assume discretion? Yes. And Richard, hurry. When she hung up, she sat in the dark for a long time, the sound of rain filling the silence. A strange satisfaction curled inside her chest. For years, Eleanor had judged her, condescended to her, made her feel like an outsider. But now Vanessa held something far more powerful than money, the truth, and she could use it. Mark's footsteps startled her. He appeared at the doorway, his hair disheveled, eyes tired. What are you doing up? He asked. Vanessa slid the documents under a folder before he could see. Couldn't sleep, she said. He nodded absently and sat down, rubbing his temples. I keep thinking about Mom, he murmured. It's like she knew I'd fail her. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. Then softly, she said, "Maybe she failed you first." Mark frowned, confused. But before he could speak, thunder cracked overhead, shaking the windows. Vanessa smiled faintly to herself, her reflection flickering in the glass. "Even saints," she whispered, "have sins worth uncovering." 2 days later, Vanessa received a call. It was nearly midnight. She was sitting in the kitchen, staring at her untouched glass of wine, when her phone buzzed with Richard Barlow's number. "Mrs. Hart." His deep voice came through, calm, but waited. "I've gone through the files you sent." Vanessa sat up straighter. "And you were right to be suspicious. There was a transaction from the William and Jensen Medical Fund in 1998. Exactly $600,000 transferred into a private trust under Thomas Hart's name. The account was closed a year later, and all assets moved to a joint account belonging to him and Eleanor Hart." Vanessa's pulse raced. "So they stole it." A pause. "That's not the word I'd use. The investigation report back then was complicated. Officially, it was recorded as an internal settlement. Off the record, it was meant to cover something. Or someone." Vanessa frowned. "Cover what?" "A malpractice suit," Barlow said quietly. "William and Jensen was under federal scrutiny for misusing employee pension funds. Thomas Hart was the lead accountant at the time. The company tried to pin the blame on him. He was supposed to take the fall." Vanessa blinked. "Wait, so they accused him?" "Yes. From what I can piece together, Eleanor must have realized what was happening and went to the board herself. She negotiated a deal, took the funds under her husband's name to repay the pensions quietly, making it look like restitution. It kept Thomas out of prison but ruined his career." The words hung in the air like smoke. Vanessa didn't respond at first. She stared at the wine glass, the light trembling on its surface. "So," she said finally, "she didn't steal it. She saved him." "Technically, yes, but the cover-up was still illegal. If anyone reopened that file, it could stain the family name, even now." Vanessa felt her stomach twist. What she had thought was leverage suddenly looked like poison. She had wanted to expose Eleanor, to destroy her sanctimonious image, but this revelation didn't make the old woman a villain. It made her human. Barlow continued, "There's one more thing. The signature on that trust? It wasn't only Thomas's. Eleanor's father, a retired judge, co-signed it, which means she had help protecting it. Whatever she did with full intention." Vanessa rubbed her temples. "You said it could still ruin the family? How?" "Because those assets, the ones in Ava's inheritance, technically originated from that fund. If anyone traces it back, the estate could be frozen pending investigation." The silence stretched. Vanessa exhaled slowly. "So, the perfect Eleanor Hart left her granddaughter an empire built on stolen restitution?" "That's one way to put it," Barlow said evenly. "Another way is, she built redemption from ashes." The line clicked dead, leaving Vanessa alone in the dark. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. For the first time, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt unsettled. The woman she'd despised for so long was no longer an enemy. She was a mirror, one showing Vanessa everything she might one day become. Vanessa looked toward the stairs where Mark slept, then whispered to the empty room. "You didn't just save him, did you, Eleanor? You were saving yourself too." Mark found Vanessa sitting on the couch, surrounded by folders and papers. The television flickered quietly in the background, showing muted images of a late-night news broadcast. Her eyes were glassy, her expression distant, almost hollow. "Vanessa," he said softly. What's all this? She didn't answer right away. She handed him the beige folder. The one marked Property Records, Thomas Hart Trust. Read it, she said flatly. Mark frowned, flipping through the documents. At first, nothing made sense. Just numbers, account details, signatures. Then he saw it. His father's name, the fund transfer, and the $600,000 entry. His brow furrowed. This was Dad's? He stole— No, Vanessa interrupted sharply. He didn't steal. She did, to save him. Mark froze. What? Vanessa stood up, pacing. I talked to a lawyer. He found the records. Your dad was supposed to take the fall for a company scandal. Eleanor went to them, begged them to let him walk. In exchange, she signed over a false settlement under his name. It saved him, but destroyed everything else. Mark sank back into the couch. The weight of her words pressed down on his chest. She never told me. Of course not, Vanessa said bitterly. That's what saints do, right? They carry their sins in silence. She built her whole life around that lie. The house, your childhood, everything. Even your inheritance comes from that money. He shook his head. No, she wouldn't. She did, Mark, Vanessa snapped, her voice breaking. And you know what the worst part is? I don't even hate her for it anymore. Mark looked up, startled. Vanessa's eyes glistened, her tone trembling between anger and grief. All these years, I thought she judged me. That she looked down on me because I wasn't good enough for you. But now I realize she saw herself in me. The woman who lied, who covered up, who did whatever she had to do for the man she loved. The confession hung in the air. Mark's throat tightened. Vanessa, she laughed bitterly. You think she didn't know what you'd become? She knew. She knew you'd let her down, just like she once let herself down for him. That's why she wrote those letters. Not to punish us, but to warn us. Mark buried his face in his hands. His mind reeled with images of his mother, her gentle smile, her quiet dignity, the way she'd always avoided talking about the past. He finally understood why she never wanted him to know the full story. She hadn't been protecting her reputation. She'd been protecting his memory of her. He whispered, all this time, she carried it alone. Vanessa sat beside him, quieter now. Maybe she wanted you to be better than both of them, she said softly. But you can't be better than someone you don't understand. The two of them sat there in silence, surrounded by the ghosts of paper and ink, guilt and grace. In the distance, thunder rolled again. Softer this time, like an echo fading away. And somewhere deep inside Mark, something shifted. Not forgiveness yet, but the beginning of it. Mark arrived at William Gray's office just after sunrise. The city was still half asleep, bathed in the pale blue of early morning. He hadn't told Vanessa where he was going. He just drove, the letter clutched in his hand, his mind replaying every word of it. Mr. Gray greeted him with quiet understanding, as though he had been expecting him. You look tired, he said softly. Sit down, Mark. Mark did. I found something, he said, his voice hoarse. About the money, the fund, the transfer. I know now what she did. The old lawyer nodded slowly. I thought you might. He opened a drawer and took out a small sealed envelope, worn and yellowed like parchment. Your mother left this for you. She told me to give it to you only when you were ready to see her, not as a mother, but as a person. Mark stared at the envelope for a long time before breaking the seal. The handwriting was unmistakable. Eleanor's, neat and careful. My dear boy, the letter began. If you're reading this, then you've learned what I've hidden. I won't ask for forgiveness. What your father and I did was wrong, but it was done for love. Not the kind that redeems, but the kind that clings. Afraid to lose. Mark's throat tightened. When I took that money, I thought I was saving your future, but I only built walls around our guilt. I let fear guide me instead of faith, and fear always asks for more. He wiped at his eyes, reading on. That's why I left the will the way I did. It was never about punishing you or Vanessa. It was about balance. I wanted the truth to surface only when love had vanished, so that maybe, in losing everything, you'd remember what it means to cherish something real again. The letter ended simply. Don't defend me. Don't condemn me. Just learn from me. Tell Ava who I was, all of me, and teach her to live without fear. That will be enough. Mark folded the letter with shaking hands. For a long moment, neither he nor Mr. Gray spoke. Finally, the lawyer said quietly, "She knew this day would come. She believed that sometimes truth must wait for love to return before it can be heard." Mark stood slowly, slipping the letter into his coat pocket. She was right, he murmured. When he stepped outside, the first light of dawn broke over the city. The air was cool, clean, the kind of morning his mother would have loved. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel haunted by her absence. He felt guided by it. The days after the truth came out felt quieter, too quiet. Vanessa had stopped shouting. Mark had stopped defending. Even Ava, usually a small burst of laughter in every room, spoke in hushed tones now. It was as if the whole house had exhaled after years of holding its breath. Mark spent most of his time in the garden, Eleanor's garden, where her favorite lilies had begun to bloom again. He trimmed them carefully, though his hands shook whenever he touched the stems. There was something sacred in that silence. He didn't talk much anymore, but the neighbors often saw him kneeling by the flower beds, head bowed, whispering things no one could hear. Vanessa watched from the kitchen window, her reflection pale in the glass. The documents she'd uncovered were gone, locked away in the attic, where dust would keep their secrets. She could have destroyed them, but she didn't. Maybe guilt had finally replaced pride. One afternoon, she brought him coffee, placing the cup beside him. "You're out here every day," she said softly. Mark didn't look up. "She used to say these flowers were stubborn, that they grow best after a storm." Vanessa hesitated. "Do you hate me?" He finally turned to her. His eyes were tired, but there was no anger left in them. "No," he said. "We just got lost. All of us." She wanted to argue, to defend herself, to remind him of how Eleanor had judged her. But the words died on her lips. She realized it didn't matter anymore who had been right or wrong. They were all ghosts now, trapped in their own choices. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked through the house, touching the walls, the framed photo of Eleanor on the piano. "You won, didn't you?" she whispered bitterly. "Even gone, you're still teaching us lessons." Her voice cracked. She pressed her hand to the photo, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Maybe you were right about me." "Maybe I was too proud to see what love really looks like." Upstairs, Mark lay awake, listening to the rain tapping on the roof. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't angry at his mother or his wife. He was angry at himself, because only now did he understand what Eleanor had truly meant. That love, left unattended, doesn't die with time. It dies with silence. Ava found her father in the attic one Sunday morning. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by boxes. the kind that smelled like dust and memory. In his hands was Eleanor's old photo album. "Dad?" she said softly, stepping closer. "What are you doing?" Mark looked up and smiled faintly. "Just remembering." He turned a page, showing her a picture of a much younger Eleanor holding him as a baby. "She used to hum when she was nervous," he said. "The same song every time. I used to hate it. Thought it made her sound old." "What song?" Ava asked. He chuckled. "I don't even know the name, but it's stuck in my head now. Funny how that happens." Ava sat beside him, tracing the edges of the photo. "She looked happy," she whispered. "She was," Mark said quietly. "Even when she had nothing, she still made it feel like everything." He paused, then added, "I didn't see that before. I was too busy trying to prove I was something on my own." Ava looked at him, eyes serious in a way that didn't fit her age. "Grandma forgave you, Dad. I can tell." He swallowed hard. "How?" "Because she left you the flowers," Ava said simply. "She said in her letter that lilies mean forgiveness." Mark's eyes welled with tears. He nodded slowly, closing the album. "You're smarter than both of us put together," he said, smiling weakly. They sat there in silence for a while, the air heavy but calm. Dust floated in the sunlight streaming through the small attic window. Ava leaned her head on his shoulder. After a long pause, Mark spoke again, his voice trembling. "Ava, I need to tell you something. About Grandma, and your grandpa, and the money." "I know," Ava interrupted softly. "Mom told me. It's okay." He looked at her, startled. "She said grown-ups make mistakes when they're scared," Ava explained. "And that's what Grandma did. But she fixed it." Mark smiled through his tears. "She did," he whispered. "She fixed us, even now." Ava nodded, then slipped her small hand into his. "Can we visit her garden?" she asked. Mark exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest easing just a little. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go see the lilies." As they walked down the attic stairs, sunlight followed them, soft, golden, forgiving. And for the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like home. Vanessa packed quietly. No shouting, no tears, no slammed doors, just the soft sound of zippers and folded fabric. The house felt different now, stripped of its sharp edges. She had decided to leave for a while, to visit her sister in Portland, maybe start over. She didn't say for how long. Mark watched from the doorway, his hands in his pockets. "You don't have to rush," he said. Vanessa smiled faintly. "I do. Sometimes staying is worse than leaving." He nodded. There was nothing to argue about. They had fought too long, blamed too many ghosts. Maybe space was the only kindness left between them. Ava appeared at the door holding a small potted plant, a lily sprout from the garden. "It's for you, Mommy," she said. "So you don't forget us." Vanessa knelt, her eyes softening. "I could never forget you, sweetheart." She kissed Ava's forehead, then hugged her tightly, longer than she meant to. When she finally stood, she met Mark's gaze. "Take care of her, and take care of yourself." "I will," he said. "You too." She looked around the house one last time. It wasn't the home she'd built, not anymore, but something in its walls had changed. It was quieter, warmer somehow, as if Eleanor's spirit had finally forgiven them all. At the door, she paused. "You know," she said softly, "your mother was right about one thing." Mark raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "She said that love isn't about holding on. It's about learning when to let go." He smiled sadly. "She'd like that you finally agree with her." Vanessa laughed under her breath, a small, weary sound. Don't get used to it. Then she stepped outside. The wind lifted her hair as she walked down the driveway, the sunlight glinting off the car window before it disappeared around the corner. Mark stood there long after she was gone, listening to the quiet hum of the garden behind him. Ava tugged his sleeve. She'll come back, right? He looked down at his daughter and nodded. Maybe. But even if she doesn't, we'll be okay. Ava smiled. Because Grandma's still here? Mark looked toward the garden, where the lilies swayed gently in the breeze. Yeah, he said softly. Because Grandma's still here. The petals shimmered in the afternoon light, pale, fragile, alive. And for the first time, Mark understood. His mother hadn't left them nothing. She'd left them a way to start again. Spring arrived quietly, as if it didn't want to startle anyone. The snow melted from the garden path, revealing tiny green shoots pushing through the soil. The lilies, stubborn as ever, coming back to life. Mark stood on the porch one morning, coffee in hand, watching Ava chase butterflies across the lawn. The air smelled of earth and rain, and for the first time in years, the house no longer felt heavy. It breathed again. He'd kept his promise to his mother. He'd stayed. He'd tended the garden, repaired the fence, even repainted the old piano room where Eleanor used to read in the afternoons. Each stroke of paint felt like an apology, not just to her, but to himself. Ava had grown taller, more confident. She talked about her grandmother often, not with sadness, but with affection. Grandma said the sky looks different when you forgive someone, she'd told him one evening. I think that's true. The stars don't hurt to look at anymore. Mark had smiled, unable to speak. Children had a way of saying things grown-ups spent decades trying to understand. Every week, they brought fresh flowers to the garden. Sometimes they talked to Eleanor as if she were still there. Other times, they just sat in silence, letting the wind carry the words they couldn't say. One evening, Mark found an old cassette player in the attic. Inside was a tape labeled in Eleanor's handwriting. For when you're ready? He hesitated before pressing play. At first, there was static. Then came her voice. Soft, steady, familiar. Mark, if you're hearing this, it means time has done its work. I hope you've forgiven me by now, or at least that you've tried. I wanted you to know I was never angry, even when you stopped calling, even when you forgot. Mothers don't stop loving. They just wait. He sat there, eyes closed, as her voice filled the room. If I could give you one more thing, it wouldn't be money, or the house, or even the lilies. It would be the courage to keep loving, even when it's messy, even when it hurts. Because love, my boy, is what makes us real. The tape clicked off. Mark leaned back, tears rolling down his face. Not of grief, but of release. From outside came Ava's laughter, echoing through the open window. He smiled through his tears, whispering, I'm ready, Mom. The wind stirred softly, brushing through the curtains, carrying the scent of lilies into the room. It felt like an answer. Years later, the house on Maple Avenue stood the same, small, white, wrapped in vines of ivy. But its heart had changed. It was no longer a monument to loss. It was a place that remembered and forgave. Ava was 16 now. She sat at the kitchen table one rainy afternoon, her textbooks spread around her, a cup of tea steaming by her elbow. On the counter lay an old leather journal, her grandmother's. She'd found it while cleaning the attic. The pages were filled with delicate handwriting, looping and careful. Some entries were about the garden, some about Mark's childhood, and others, raw and trembling, about the nights she'd cried after Thomas's death. Ava read slowly, letting each word sink in. We never know how strong we are until kindness feels heavy to carry. Some days, love feels like forgiveness in disguise. If you ever lose your way, plant something. Roots remember where home is. Ava smiled softly. She could almost hear Eleanor's voice. Patient, warm, wise. Mark entered the kitchen, his hair peppered with gray now, his hands stained with soil. Still reading? He asked. She nodded. Grandma wrote a lot about you. He chuckled. I bet half of it's about how stubborn I was. Maybe, Ava said. But she also wrote that you had your father's heart. Mark paused, leaning against the doorway. I think she was wrong, he said quietly. I have hers. Ava closed the journal gently. You know, I think she'd be proud of us. She already was, he said. Even when we didn't deserve it. They shared a smile, small but real, the kind of smile that feels like sunlight after a long winter. Later that evening, as the rain stopped, they went out to the garden. The lilies were in full bloom, their pale petals glistening under the silver sky. Ava knelt to touch one, her fingers brushing against a tiny wooden plaque buried in the soil. It read, Eleanor Hart, 1957, 2025. Nothing truly ends where love has been. Ava looked up at her father. Can I add something? He nodded. She took a small stone and, beneath the inscription, carved the words carefully. And it begins again. Mark placed his hand on her shoulder, his voice steady but full. Yes, it does. The camera of life might have pulled back here. The garden bathed in fading light. A father and daughter standing among lilies that refused to stop blooming. Somewhere in that quiet, a voice, soft, familiar, seemed to whisper through the wind. Maybe I had nothing left to give, but I still had love. And that was enough. And this time, it truly was.